The laughter in the boardroom was deafening. It wasn't just a chuckle, it was a full-throated, mocking roar that bounced off the polished mahogany table and the floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the city. My uncle, Richard, the CEO of Innovate Dynamics, had a smug grin plastered on his face. My cousin, Leo, leaned back in his chair, wiping a fake tear from his eye as he revelled in my public humiliation. The entire executive team, people I had worked alongside for a decade, either joined in the laughter or stared down at their notebooks, too cowardly to make eye contact. Richard had just announced my termination, effective immediately. The reason given was gross incompetence regarding the failed Titan project, a project I had warned against from the very beginning, a project they had pushed forward against all my data-driven objections. I stood there, clutching the useless termination letter in my hand, my face burning not with shame, but with a cold, controlled fury. They saw me as a pathetic failure, the family scapegoat finally being put out to pasture. They thought they were just cutting out dead weight, finally getting rid of the quiet, nerdy nephew who didn't fit their slick corporate image. They believed they were securing their power, cementing their control over the company my grandfather had built from nothing. What they didn't know was that in firing me, they had just triggered a silent alarm. A secret protocol my grandfather had put in place years ago. They thought they were closing a door on me. In reality, they had just handed me the keys to the entire kingdom. The laughter died down, and my uncle gestured towards the door with a flick of his wrist. "Security will see you out, Alex," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. I just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. They were celebrating a tiny, hollow victory, completely oblivious to the fact that their world was about to be turned upside down. They had just fired an employee. In a few minutes, they would be facing their new boss. You're probably wondering how getting fired could possibly lead to me taking over the whole company. To understand that, you have to understand the promise I made to my grandfather on his deathbed, a promise sealed with a key to a dusty old safe deposit box. My steps were silent on the plush carpet as I walked down the long corridor, the sound of their fading laughter a distant echo. Security didn't escort me, they knew me. I had helped install the very security system they were monitoring. As I walked, I wasn't thinking about the humiliation. I was thinking about my grandfather, Arthur. He founded Innovate Dynamics with a dream and a handful of patents. He was a brilliant engineer, a man who believed technology should serve humanity. His office, which my Uncle Richard now occupied, used to be filled with blueprints, prototypes, and the smell of solder and coffee. Now it smelled of expensive cologne and ego. My grandfather was the one who taught me how to read a circuit diagram, the one who gave me my first toolkit. He saw a spark in me that his own son lacked. "Your Uncle Richard knows how to sell a product, Alex," he once told me, his voice thin with age. "But you understand how to build one. Never forget that the heart of this company isn't in the boardroom, it's in the workshop." This family had always operated on two tracks. My cousin Leo was the golden child, groomed for leadership despite having zero interest in the company's actual work. He got the promotions, the accolades, the new company car. I was the scapegoat, the quiet, tireless engine kept in the back rooms. I was the one who pulled all-nighters fixing the server crashes, debugging the code Leo's outsourced teams had botched, and perfecting the designs he would later present as his own. I remember the Phoenix Initiative 3 years ago. It was my brainchild, a revolutionary new battery technology. I spent 18 months developing it, often sleeping in the lab. When it was time to present it to the board, Leo walked in, took my report, and delivered it word for word. My Uncle Richard looked at him with such pride, announcing a massive bonus for Leo for his visionary leadership. I was given a token, "Thank you for your support" role and a $500 gift card. They didn't see it as exploitation. To them, it was the natural order of things. I was the tool. They were the craftsmen. My purpose was to work, to produce, to make them look good, and to remain invisible. For years, I tolerated it for one reason: my promise to my grandfather to protect his legacy from the inside. But their greed had finally made them careless. The Titan project wasn't just a failure, it was a disaster born of Leo's incompetence and Richard's arrogance. They needed someone to blame, to protect the stock price and their own positions. Who better than the family ghost? They thought they were simply continuing the pattern, taking what was mine, my work, my reputation, and using it for their own ends. This time, however, they had taken one step too far. I didn't take the elevator down to the parking garage. I walked out the front entrance, past the large chrome logo of Innovate Dynamics that I had helped design, and into the cool morning air of the city. I didn't look back. There was nothing for me there anymore. My uncle and cousin assumed I would go home, defeated, and start polishing my resume. They underestimated me, just as they had my entire life. My destination wasn't my small apartment, it was a stately old building downtown. The offices of Harrison and Finch, a law firm that had handled my grandfather's affairs for over 50 years. The Titan project was the weapon they used against me, but it was a bomb of their own making. It was Leo's pet project, a misguided attempt to secure a lucrative military contract for advanced surveillance drones. It was flashy, ambitious, and utterly outside our area of expertise. Our company's strength was in sustainable energy and efficient power systems. I presented a comprehensive report detailing exactly why it would fail. The R&D costs were astronomical, the market was already dominated by 3 major aerospace firms, and the preliminary technology was unreliable. I recommended we invest in upgrading our Phoenix battery technology instead, a guaranteed return. Richard had waved my report away in the meeting. "We need to think bigger, Alex," he'd said dismissively. "Leo has the kind of aggressive vision this company needs to get to the next level. You're too cautious." They put me in charge of the project's budget compliance, a classic management trap. It gave me the responsibility for the numbers, but no authority over the spending. Leo burned through money, choosing flashy, overpriced vendors over more reliable, cost-effective ones. I filed weekly reports highlighting the massive overruns and the technical risks, but Richard signed off on every single expense. When the prototype drone's main processor catastrophically failed during a live demonstration for Department of Defense officials, losing us the contract and a $50 million investment, they had their scapegoat. They produced a falsified record showing I had signed off on the defective processor, claiming I chose the cheaper option to try and claw back some of the budget I was supposed to be managing. It was a lie, crafted so perfectly that to an outsider, it looked like a clear case of my incompetence causing the entire fiasco. They had built my gallows, piece by piece, and were now celebrating my execution. But as I pushed open the heavy oak door to Mr. Harrison's law firm, I knew I wasn't the one who was about to be judged. Mr. Harrison's office felt like a time capsule. The air smelled of old paper and leather, a stark contrast to the sterile, recycled air of the Innovate Dynamics Tower. Dark wood shelves overflowed with law books, and a portrait of my grandfather, painted in his prime, watched over the room with a knowing gaze. Mr. Harrison, a man now in his 80s with eyes as sharp as they were 50 years ago, stood up from behind his massive oak desk. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Alex," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper, "I received the news alert about your termination. I had hoped this day would never come." He gestured to a leather armchair. I didn't sit. Instead, I reached into my pocket and placed a small, old-fashioned brass key on his polished desk. It was the key my grandfather had given me a week before he passed away. "He told me you would know what to do with this," I said. A sad smile touched the old lawyer's lips. He nodded, then turned and walked to the portrait of my grandfather. He swung it aside, revealing a heavy iron safe. With practiced hands, he spun the dial, opened the heavy door, and retrieved a thick, dust-covered leather portfolio sealed with wax. He placed it on the desk and broke the seal. "Your grandfather was a visionary, but he was also a realist," Mr. Harrison began, his eyes fixed on me. "He loved your uncle, but he was not blind to his greed or his ego. He feared Richard would one day value profit over principles and risk the company's soul. So, he created a failsafe." He slid a document across the desk. It was titled, "The AM Innovate Legacy Trust." He explained that my grandfather had placed 35% of his personal founder's shares into this trust. They were untouchable, invisible, and managed by the firm, waiting for a single condition to be met. Mr. Harrison pointed a trembling finger to a specific clause. "This is the contingency mandate," he said. I read the crisp, typewritten words. "In the event of the involuntary termination of my grandson, Alexander Morrow, for any reason other than a felony conviction, full ownership and all voting rights of the shares contained within this trust shall immediately be transferred to him." It was an earthquake in writing, but there was more. "Your grandfather also left you the 16% of the company that belonged to your father," Mr. Harrison continued. "Richard has been the custodian of those shares, but he never had the right to sell them. As of this moment, Alex, with the 35% from the trust and your father's 16%, you control 51% of Innovate Dynamics." He leaned back. "The firing was the trigger. They thought they were pushing you out. Instead, they gave you everything." He looked at me, his expression grim. "The power is now yours. What do you want to do?" I looked from the document to the portrait of my grandfather. My voice was steady and cold. "Activate it. Every last share. Right now." Mr. Harrison didn't hesitate. He picked up his phone, his old, steady hands dialing a number from memory. "It's Howard Harrison," he said into the receiver, his voice now carrying an iron authority that could cut through steel. "I am invoking the contingency mandate of the AM Innovate Legacy Trust effective immediately. Yes, the conditions have been met. I am transmitting the notarized activation documents and the certificate of termination to you now. Execute the transfer." He made 2 more calls just like that, one to the company's official stock transfer agent and another to the legal counsel for the board of directors, informing them that a change in majority ownership had occurred. While he worked, I stood by the window, looking down at the city streets. I didn't feel a rush of victory or a surge of adrenaline. I felt the immense weight of my grandfather's trust, a responsibility that settled over me like a heavy coat. I remembered his words to me as a boy when I had built my first working circuit board. "Cleverness is easy, Alex," he had said, inspecting my work. "Wisdom is hard. Never confuse the two. What you build is less important than why you build it." Within 15 minutes, it was done. Mr. Harrison hung up the phone and looked at me. "The shares have been transferred and recorded. Officially, electronically, and irrevocably. You are the majority shareholder of Innovate Dynamics." He allowed himself a thin, satisfied smile. The beauty of it, the absolute legal poetry, is that their own actions perfected your claim. The termination letter they gave you, citing incompetence, is the official proof that you were not fired for a felony. They handed us the very key we needed to unlock the vault. They will have no legal recourse. They built the cage, and I have just locked them inside it. He folded his hands on his desk. They will be receiving official notification of the ownership change through their legal channels within the hour. By then, they'll be drunk on champagne, celebrating your demise. I turned from the window. The cold fury from the boardroom had now crystallized into pure, unyielding purpose. "I'm going back," I said. It wasn't a question. Mr. Harrison nodded slowly. "That is your right. You don't need to be an employee to enter the boardroom. You are the owner. As the majority shareholder, you have the right to call an immediate emergency meeting of the board. You can set the agenda. You can nominate a new chairman, yourself for instance. He was right. This wasn't about a dramatic confrontation. It was about a simple legal execution of power. I walked towards the door, the useless termination letter still crumpled in my pocket. It was the most valuable piece of paper I now owned. The ride back to the Innovate Dynamics Tower was short. The city seemed the same, the cars and people a blur outside my taxi window, but my world had been fundamentally reordered. When I had left this building less than 2 hours ago, I was an outcast. Now I was returning as its owner. As I walked back into the pristine, soulless lobby, the receptionist who had watched me leave with pity in her eyes now stared with a slack-jawed expression of pure confusion. I didn't give her a glance. I walked straight to the executive elevator, my stride confident and measured. My keycard had already been deactivated, but it didn't matter. A junior security guard moved to intercept me, but stopped when he saw the look on my face. It was not the look of a disgruntled ex-employee. It was the look of a man on a mission. He simply stepped aside. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent. When the doors opened, I could hear them. The sounds of celebration, muffled laughter, the clinking of champagne flutes, my uncle's booming voice telling some self-congratulatory anecdote. They were toasting my demise, celebrating their victory on company time and the company's dime. My dime. I walked down the hall and stopped before the double glass doors of the boardroom. I didn't pause. I didn't hesitate. I simply pushed them open and stepped inside. The effect was instantaneous. It was as if someone had hit a mute button. All laughter, all conversation ceased. 20 pairs of eyes fixed on me. Richard was standing at the head of the table, a champagne flute raised high in a toast. Leo was slouched in a chair beside him, a smug grin frozen on his face. The other executives, the same ones who had laughed at me, now looked like startled animals. My uncle's face darkened with rage. "What in God's name are you doing here?" he sputtered. "I made it clear you were not welcome. Security." I ignored him. I walked calmly and deliberately around the long table until I stood directly in front of him. I looked at the high-backed leather chair he stood before, my grandfather's chair. Then I looked him in the eye. "There's been a mistake," I said, my voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "You're in my seat." A moment of stunned silence, and then he scoffed. "Have you lost your mind?" I pulled out my phone and, with a few taps, forwarded the official notice of ownership transfer from Mr. Harrison's firm to the entire executive email list. A second later, phones began to chime and vibrate all around the table. "As of 10:15 a.m. this morning," I announced to the silent room, "I'm the controlling shareholder of Innovate Dynamics with a 51% stake. This is no longer your company, Richard, it's mine. And this," I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper, "is my boardroom." A wave of disbelief washed over the room. Phones were held in trembling hands as executives scrolled through the legal notification. Their faces, flushed with champagne and victory just moments before, turned pale. My Uncle Richard stared at his screen, his jaw working silently as he read and reread the words that confirmed his world had just ended. He finally looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and panic. "This is impossible," he whispered, the bluster gone from his voice. "A trick. It's theft." "On the contrary," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the tense silence. "It's the execution of my grandfather's will. Something you should know a thing or two about twisting for your own benefit." I didn't wait for him to move. I simply took another step forward, and he instinctively stumbled back, away from the chairman's seat. I slid the high-backed leather chair out and sat down. It felt right. I placed my hands on the cool mahogany of the table my grandfather had chosen decades ago. The room was mine. This is now an official emergency meeting of the Board of Directors of Innovate Dynamics, I announced. Let the record show all members are present. I looked around the table, meeting the terrified eyes of each executive. The first order of business, I move for the immediate and indefinite suspension of CEO Richard Morrow and Vice President Leo Morrow, pending a full and independent forensic audit of the company's financials, with specific focus on the Titan project. A collective gasp went through the room. Richard found his voice again, a shrill cry of outrage. "You can't do that. I am the CEO." Leo looked like he was about to be physically ill, his face a ghastly shade of white. "I can," I stated flatly. "And I am. As the majority shareholder, my vote is the only one that matters. The motion is seconded and carried. Richard, Leo, you are suspended, effective now." I turned to the head of security, who stood frozen by the door. "Please escort these two gentlemen from the premises, revoke their access cards and secure their offices. Nothing is to be touched." As the guard moved forward hesitantly, I delivered the final piece of news. A team from Sterling Forensic Accounting will be arriving in 30 minutes. They are to be given full, unrestricted access to every server, every file, and every financial record dating back 10 years. We're going to find out what really happened to the $50 million from the Titan project. I paused, letting my gaze fall on my uncle and cousin, who are now being flanked by security. "And any other discrepancies we happen to find along the way." The security guards, caught between the man who was their boss 5 minutes ago and the man who was their boss now, finally acted. They each placed a hand on my uncle's and cousin's arms. Richard shook them off violently. "Don't you touch me," he snarled, his face purple with rage. "You will regret this, Alex. I will bury you in lawsuits. I will ruin you." Leo, in contrast, was utterly broken. He was pale and trembling, not even making eye contact as he was guided towards the door. He looked like a child who had just been caught. The heavy glass door swung shut behind them, leaving a profound and unnerving silence in its wake. The party was officially over. I turned my attention to the remaining executives, who sat rigid in their chairs, avoiding my gaze. "Let me be perfectly clear," I said, my voice low and even. "Your employment here is not terminated today, but it is under review. Your sole focus is to cooperate fully and transparently with the auditors. Any attempt to hide, delete, or alter records will be considered grounds for immediate termination and potential legal action. Your loyalty is to this company and its shareholders, of which I am the majority. Prove you understand that." Less than an hour later, the audit team from Sterling arrived. They were led by a woman named Ms. Evans, whose sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor told me she was precisely the right person for the job. I met them in the boardroom and handed her a single sheet of paper. "Start with these," I told her. "The vendor contracts for the Titan project, especially a company called Apex Consulting. Cross-reference every invoice with Leo Morrow's personal bank statements. Then, I want a full review of all executive bonuses paid out over the last 3 years against our quarterly performance reports." I had been making this list in my head for years. The next 2 weeks were a blur of spreadsheets, server logs, and shocking revelations. Working alongside Ms. Evans and her team, we uncovered a level of rot that was worse than I could have ever imagined. Apex Consulting was a shell corporation registered to Leo's best friend. It had billed us for over $12 million for non-existent services, with the money eventually funneled into an offshore account in Leo's name. We found that Richard had been systematically suppressing company profit reports right before his stock option vestings to drive the price down, allowing him to buy cheap, only to release surprisingly positive news a month later. He was manipulating the market using his own company. They had expensed lavish vacations, luxury cars, even gambling debts, all buried under vague project codes. The truth was horrifying. Innovate Dynamics wasn't just mismanaged, it was on the verge of bankruptcy, a hollowed-out shell propped up by fraudulent accounting. They hadn't just fired me to cover up a failed project, they fired me because I was the only one who might have been smart enough to uncover the truth before the whole house of cards came crashing down. With the full damning audit report from Ms. Evans sitting on my desk, I had everything I needed. The document was over 200 pages long, a meticulous and irrefutable chronicle of their greed. It wasn't just a corporate playbook, it was a criminal indictment. My next step had to be precise and final. I had my assistant call Richard and Leo, summoning them to my office, their old office, to discuss the final terms of their separation agreement. I knew a hint of money would be the one thing to guarantee their attendance. They arrived the next day. Richard came with a slick, expensive-looking lawyer, his old arrogance having returned. He clearly believed he could threaten and negotiate his way into a golden parachute. Leo trailed behind them, gaunt and hollow-eyed, a ghost haunting his father's last stand. "Alex," Richard began, taking a seat without being invited, his lawyer beside him. "Let's be sensible. A messy public fight is bad for the company, bad for the family. We're prepared to sign a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for a standard severance package, commensurate with our years of service. 5 years' salary should do it. It's the clean way to handle this." His lawyer nodded, ready to begin the negotiation. I let the silence hang in the room for a long moment, watching their confidence waver. Then I slid the thick audit binder across the polished desk. It landed with a heavy, final thud. "There will be no severance package. Richard," I said softly, "this isn't a negotiation." His lawyer picked up the report, his eyes scanning the summary page. His professional composure vanished, replaced by a look of genuine shock. "What is this?" Richard demanded. "That is a copy of the report we filed with the district attorney's office this morning," I explained, my voice calm and cold. "It details $12 million embezzled through a shell company, systematic securities fraud, and wire fraud, just to start. This meeting isn't about your severance, it's a professional courtesy before the inevitable." As if on cue, my office door opened. 2 plainclothes detectives stepped inside, followed by Mr. Harrison, who was there to formally represent the company. One of the detectives looked directly at my uncle and cousin. "Richard Morrow and Leo Morrow," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "you are under arrest for multiple counts of felony fraud and embezzlement. Please stand up and place your hands behind your backs." The colour drained from Richard's face. All the arrogance, all the bluster evaporated, replaced by raw, pathetic fear. You can't," he stammered, looking wildly from me to his now useless lawyer. Leo simply let out a quiet sob and slumped in his chair, utterly defeated. As the detectives cuffed them and led them past the glass walls of my office, in full view of the entire executive floor, I stood up. They looked at me one last time, their eyes pleading. I gave them no comfort. "When you fired me," I said, my voice just loud enough for them to hear, "you told me you were getting rid of a liability. You were right." The arrest of a prominent CEO and his son sent shockwaves through the financial world. The story was everywhere. The stock of Innovate Dynamics plummeted overnight as the full ugly truth of its financial state was laid bare. I was left with the smouldering ruins of my grandfather's legacy, a company teetering on the edge of collapse, poisoned from the inside by the very people supposed to protect it. My victory felt hollow, the silence in the executive suite deafening. The revenge was complete, but the real work had just begun. The next morning, I called an all-hands meeting with every employee, from the custodians to the senior engineers. I stood before them not as a conqueror, but as one of them. I didn't use corporate speak or make false promises. I told them the unvarnished truth. The company was nearly broke, its reputation was in tatters, and our path forward would be difficult. But then I told them about my grandfather. I spoke of his belief in innovation, integrity, and the people in the labs who were the true heart of the company. I announced we were immediately scrapping all vanity projects and focusing our remaining capital on one thing, the Phoenix battery technology, the project I knew would redefine our industry. I promoted the brilliant engineers who had been marginalized by my uncle's regime, and I made a promise to every person in that room that from that day forward, Innovate Dynamics would be a place where hard work was rewarded, integrity was paramount, and good ideas were our most valuable currency. It was a long road. There were months of painful restructuring, of begging banks for credit, of rebuilding trust with clients one by one. But slowly, something incredible happened. The spirit of the old Innovate Dynamics, the one my grandfather had built, began to return. The labs buzzed with renewed energy. People stayed late not because they were afraid, but because they were excited. I realized my true vindication wasn't the moment the handcuffs clicked on my uncle's wrists. It was months later, watching a successful test of the new Phoenix prototype, surrounded by a team of cheering engineers. The need for revenge had been a fire that burned away a disease. But it was the act of building, of creating something positive from the ashes, that finally healed me. I was no longer the scapegoat, no longer defined by their betrayal. I was the leader of a company reborn. Standing in my office one night, looking out at the city lights, I glanced back at my grandfather's portrait. The cold fury was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady sense of peace. I had fulfilled my promise. I had saved his company, and in the process, I had finally found myself.